Okay. Good evening and welcome to the Planning Applications Committee. Apologies for absence, please. Thank you very much for coming along tonight, John. I thought you were substituting for Dave Ward. Oh. Right. Okay. Okay, I want it to be the right way around because she's the one that's supposed to be. Okay, thank you. And Dave's not here this evening. Okay. Minutes of the previous, declarations of pecuniary interest. Anybody? No? Minutes of the previous meeting, can we agree those? Correct record? Thank you. For the public's sake, if you've not been to planning before, but I think, have you been to planning before? The way this will operate is that officers will introduce the report, and then when that happens, objectors get 3 minutes to speak, and we've got a traffic light system here, so when it gets to amber, that means you've got 1 minute left. So it's helpful really before it goes to red, when it goes to red, if you would actually stop. Otherwise I do have to stop you. After you've had your chance to speak, then the agents, if they're present, will have an equal amount of time to respond. Then we go back to the officer if there are any issues to take up, and after that it's down to the members then to debate the issue. First of all, we take questions, and then we take comments, and then we will move to the vote and make a decision this evening on each of the items. So we will be taking the Ridgeway item first, as we have members of the public present. So I'm handing over to Tim.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the application site outlined in red is located on the north side of Ridgeway Place in Wimbledon and comprises detached 2-storey dwelling. The road is residential in character and comprises a variety of dwellings in the road. This is the existing site plan. So you can see the outline of the existing dwelling on the site. The proposal itself is for the erection of a pair of semi-detached dwellings following demolition of existing dwelling. The proposal is similar to a previous planning permission in early 2018. Each unit would have 5 bedrooms and have accommodation over 4 floors. This proposed site plan shows the outline of the ground floor plan and relationship to neighbouring dwellings. Talking through the floor plans, so this current scheme before you has a basement for both properties. This is proposed basement plan here. You should note, as seen in the report, that during the application process, the applicant has amended the size of the basement by bringing it in on both sides. So where the dotted red line is here is where the original submission was. They have done that in response to the objections raised, and particularly to the potential impact on the tree that's here next door. In terms of the ground floor plan on the left here, as you see, it steps in as it goes back. So the 2-storey building line largely here. Turning to first floor, you'll see that it's stepped in as it goes back into the site. Turning to the second floor, 2 bedrooms in the roof space, and then the roof plan. So 2 dormer windows at the front, a section of flat roof in the middle, and you see the gables at the back coming out. And this is single story at the back here with first floor here. This plan shows proposal roof plan really in its context with the 2 really neighbouring properties either side, just to assist there in terms of the roof form. Turn to the elevations. This is a proposed front elevation with a section through showing the basement floor. The external materials for this proposal would be London stock brick with slate tiled roof. The overall width design with the bay windows, dormer windows and arched front porches remains the same as that previously granted in early 2018. Proposed rear elevation. You see the gable ends coming out with first and ground floor sections stepped in. Design changes in comparison to the previous scheme at the rear consist of the adjoining central first floor sections here to link them up. and removal of first floor rear windows which were there and one here on the previous scheme. Proposed side elevation, so this elevation is mirrored on the other side as well. Design and scale of the built form here remains the same as the previously consented scheme, but with removal of side window which was here and moving it to here. And this is a section drawing submitted to the application showing you all floors of accommodation within the scheme. This is a street scene drawing. This is quite useful to compared to the existing building which is here. So you'll note obviously the design changes in the scale. The height is, to give an indication, is increasing by 400 millimetres higher than the existing ridge line. This is boundary treatment plan. So at the back, the properties will be divided by a closed board fence with trellis above. At the front, there'll be a low brick wall with fence above, along with a soft landscaping scheme in front. That soft landscaping scheme is here. So we'll be planting and soft landscaping here, parking space either side, along with bin stores. And at the back, this will be laid to grass, again with increasing soft landscape planting at the back here. Turning to the 3D visuals that the application submitted, just to assist with putting it into some context. So clearly this is the front. Got to mention earlier that the bays would be rendered, and then the London stock brickwork surround, along with some stone lentils coming through here. So there are some views from the southeastern side, looking up the road, at the rear, and the other side on the road looking that way. Just for context, members, this is the approved front and rear elevations of the previous consented scheme. As you can see, design is largely the same. Main changes are the change in materials. So the previously consented scheme was clay tiled roof with red brick facade. This scheme before used for London stock brick with slate roofs. Turning to site pictures. So from the front, this is the existing property. Additional access created on the right hand side as well as here. Just showing you the neighbouring properties here and either side. At the back. And again just views either side, showing the neighbouring properties. And with a view looking at the rear end of the garden. Members, I'll turn your attention now to the modification sheet. To reflect the amendments to the basement by reducing it in size, the revised drawing numbers are there listed to be replacing the ones in the report. The site is not in an archaeology priority zone, so therefore condition 21 is proposed to be removed. We are however proposing an additional condition 21, which is for the climate change condition to be put in. And also there's a further amendment to the report, which unfortunately is not on the modification sheet, which is paragraph 7.3, just to clarify the site is not in the conservation area, but it does adjoin the Wimbledon Hill Road conservation area to the east, and the Wimbledon West conservation area is to the west on the other, beyond the properties on Ridgeway Place further west, so it's in between two conservation areas. Overall, the proposal is considered to be an acceptable development for the site and local area. The provision of the basement has been carefully considered by the Council's flood risk manager and structural engineer, and it's considered that this can be accommodated on site in accordance with supporting reports. The proposal has been subject to amendments during the assessment following officer advice and in response to objections raised, which include the reduction in width of the basements to ensure further gap is formed to the site boundaries and neighbouring property trees. Appropriate conditions are recommended to capture the construction process, hours of work and basement construction and drainage. Overall, the proposal recommended for approval subject to conditions set out. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Oliver Plummer, please.
Good evening. I live at number 16. I have done actually for 33 years. I was very interested by your view of the roof and also the detailed scale which you're now showing, for example, is massively greater than the existing property. And indeed, in terms of our privacy at the back, there won't be any, which is clearly demonstrated by the drawings which you're showing. We don't have any trees that can blank anything, and there are a couple of points in particular. I don't know whether in the latest modification this has been changed, but certainly the rear ensuite master bedroom used to be originally have opaque glass and then subsequently had clear glass, which is further evidence of the lack of privacy. The other point is that there's a flat, as you can see, flat roof part at the back. We would certainly want specifically granted that no balcony can be put on that. The other point I'd like to make is that you've apparently had a flood assessment. I doubt very much whether you've spoken to the neighbours who live smack opposite the proposed development, who regularly get their basement pumped out. And to say that there's no flood risk is just not true. You recently granted planning for number 30, which was for development of two lots of semis. And it's very interesting, those properties have been up no more than 2 or 3 months, and the drain and manhole covers are open. So that is definitely a problem they've got. So that's really the only point. I'd like to also make one point regarding the waste removal. Again, at number 30, I've written a couple of times saying that concrete is just left on the pavement. It's solid concrete, and to Merton Council, and they've done absolutely nothing about it.
Thank you. Fiona Cooper.
Good evening, councillors. The application adds a full basement, as you saw, to the approved plans and changes the external cladding. And yesterday we learnt that there were further amended plans added to the website. We're requesting a few conditions so that the buildings blend in better and don't ruin the enjoyment of our own houses. We also want confirmation that the new changes meet our previous concerns, and if they do, that those are the ones that are approved if they get approval. This is the 4th application for number 18 by the applicant over 10 years. We've had 10 years and he hasn't even started to build yet. It's extremely stressful for the neighbours. The council should consider how to deter developers from sitting on approved plans indefinitely without building. The plans show how this new building completely overshadows its neighbours in all directions. You haven't shown this, but in my Appendix A, it's one of their drawings in the additional information I sent to the committee. It shows that we're completely overshadowed. It adds 50% more accommodation to last year's approved plans and is 4 times the floor plan of the existing house. If this is approved, we feel there should be no more approvals for yet more enlargements. The brickwork and roofing, we want them to be reverted to the red brick and clay tiles respectively as previously approved, because there are no houses in the vicinity with yellow bricks and slate tiles, including all the new builds at number 21, 23, 28 and 30. We'd also like the same conditions to apply as required by the previous approval from January 2018, that's P2807. And we welcome the removal of the site light wells and want to make sure that this latest change is in the approval. We welcome the narrowing of the side basements, as in the latest amendments, but don't know if this is enough to avoid threatening our Eucalyptus tree, because we haven't seen any measurements, and there weren't any mentioned today. Bartlett Tree Consulting stated that the submitted tree report doesn't conform to British standards for protection of our Eucalyptus tree. which is only 1 metre away from the boundary. And again, also in my Appendix B of the additional information which was circulated, there's a picture of this tree. The Eucryphia is an important amenity, visible from the street and extremely important to insects and bees, particularly as number 18's flowering cherry will be cut down, and the trees in the photos won't exist for another 10 years. There should be a condition that the new build should meet the requirements of British Standard 5837/2012 regarding construction and potential impacts on our tree, both during construction and long term. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Marcus Beale.
Thank you, Chair. The issues that have been raised by the objectors are, first of all, about privacy. I can reassure the committee and the objectors that the first floor windows will be obscured to 1.7 metres high and fixed shut, so there will be no overlooking from the side windows. There's a concern about the single-storey rear element of the building, whether that might in future become a balcony. I can reassure you that that's designed to be a zinc roof with a roof light on it, and a zinc roof cannot be walked on without spoiling the zinc, and there is no intention of making that into an accessible balcony. And further, if a future occupier wanted to do so, they would have to make a planning application, which we would expect to be refused. The basement, the basement is supported by a technical assessment, basement method statement. There were some questions that the council raised about the original method statement, and they were addressed by our engineers, and the council are now satisfied that it meets council policy. But nevertheless, there is a condition proposed to be attached to this permission, which will require a basement method statement and full details to be submitted to ensure quite properly that your concerns, the objectors' concerns about the basement are met and that it's a technically robust solution. There's a concern about the adjoining trees, and I should explain that the reason that we brought the sides of the basement back into towards the middle of the site was in part to address those potential damage to the trees, and that the council's tree officer has confirmed that she is now happy with the arrangements. I'm advised that the particular tree that was mentioned is separated by a hedge, and I'm advised that tree roots will not go underneath a hedge. So I think there's less sensitivity there. But in any case, I don't pretend to be an expert on trees. The applicant's expert has submitted their information to the council. The council's expert has stated that she is happy with it. As to the materials, which is the final concern, as the officer has correctly stated, and in the officer's report, the principal difference above ground is the change of colour of the brick from a mottled reddish brick to a London stock brick, and the change in the material of the roof from a red clay to a natural slate. The houses immediately near the application site have different materials, but as your officer has pointed out to you in his excellent report, there are a variety of materials in that area, and our client's preference is for London stock, which is a well-known material in the area, and for slate, which is a well-known material in the area. And the National Planning Policy Framework encourages local planning authorities not to impose restrictive stylistic conditions on applicants, And I think given that it is a material that is accepted throughout Wimbledon, your officer has drawn the correct conclusion in his report that it is an acceptable approach. In any case, materials will be submitted as part of the condition. So to sum up, I'd like to say from our perspective, the officer's assessment of this application and his report to the committee is very thorough and has gone into all the potential problems and responded to all the concerns. And I ask you to accept your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything to add to that?
If I may, Judge. Just very quickly, in regards to the side elevation first floor windows, yes, that is, we are obscure glazing those. That is condition 6 in the report. It's not written in full, but that is that's the condition there that we're applying. And in terms of the use of the flat roof, it would require planning permission separately, but should members want to add that as a condition, saying no use of the flat roof to single story extension, just for absolute clarity, that wouldn't be an issue to do that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Planning applications that have been approved, are any of them in terms of footprint as large as this one?
In terms of footprint, so this footprint is larger because of the basement, which extends beyond the rear elevation of the ground floor. So in terms of footprint, this is the largest, but in terms of above ground level and above, it is the same.
So it is exactly the same. So ignoring the basement, the footprint for ground floor is the same as has been approved already?
Yes.
Any other questions? Councillor Southgate.
Yeah, I suspect Councillor Dean and I both have been party to the previous applications over the last decade. And I just ask, are there any sanctions at all that we can... I suspect your answer is going to be no, but it is frustrating to find that after a lot of care to approve an application, it doesn't then get built, and then it comes back again and again, as this one has.
Unfortunately, so we can't force people to implement permissions, nor can we reject applications being submitted. What we can reject is if an application has been refused and they resubmit the exact same application over and over again, then we can actually refuse to accept that. But that's the only, you could say, sort of powers that we have.
The height, the hill, I'm assuming, is that side, coming down like this, yeah, from where I'm looking on behind you, but from your side, yeah, I see that's the hill, yeah. So the height, is that the same as the previous applications?
Yes, it is, yep.
Councillor Day.
Construction method statement seems to me to be the most important thing in this development. How are you going to ensure that you get the statement before the building work starts? Because sometimes 6 months or so after the work starts, then you get a statement, then it's a bit too late. How are you going to ensure? Is he going to inform you that the date he's going to start building? Are you going to know?
In terms of the conditions, so they are pre-commencement conditions. So before work takes place, they have to submit the details to us to be discharged. When those details come in, we do reconsult our structural engineer and our flood risk manager to relook at the extra details submitted, and then they would have to build in accordance with what's been agreed. but also what's in line with the reports that they have already submitted to us on the application as well. In terms of an actual start date of building, that is something that they could put in the construction method statement, but they wouldn't necessarily have to. But when they're discharging conditions, it's quite a clear indication that they are looking to implement the permission.
A start date before the statement comes in. Statement comes in for the start date. You're in possession of the statement before the start date, so you're pretty much satisfied that, you know, he's sticking to the conditions.
Yeah. So if they started work without discharging conditions, then it would be a breach of those conditions, and then enforcement officers would go visit and actually can serve an enforcement notice to stop work. So the onus is on them to comply with the conditions.
Councillor Indy.
Thank you, Chair. What's the distance between the edge of the new basement and the adjoining property's boundary?
I can answer that. I'll have to measure the plan, if that's okay.
See how far it is from their foundations. That's the purpose of the question.
So the measurement I've just taken has been from the edge of the actual where all the basement supporting structure is, and that is to that boundary is measuring out at 1.2 metres.
In that case, could we have a condition that, because it's quite near, at 1.2 metres, that the type of piles that they use, or the piling construction, is least amount of vibration?
I think what we have here is condition 20 has been recommended by our structural engineer, and part B of that condition actually requires for the construction method statement produced by the relevant contractor responsible for piling, excavation and construction of the basement to be submitted. So that is to be submitted and then reviewed by our structural engineer. So that condition, I think, is reasonable enough for this application.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Makin.
Could the officers answer one of the questions that was raised by the speaker earlier on about the basements flooding in other parts, or having to be water taken out of them, and why is this going ahead then, if that's the case?
So with applications of basements, we do look to our flood risk manager for assessment, his professional advice and assessment. You'll see his responses in full in the committee report. You'll see actually in the first instance he raised some concern and sought some additional information which we went back to the applicants with, and they have subsequently submitted to us. And that is further information about the drainage and how the drainage of the site is going to work. He's now happy with that information. So in terms of our assessment, it is, we get his advice, and it's based on obviously the professional reports coming in. The actual drainage scheme for this site is actually to be, it can't be infiltration into the ground because of the clay soil. but it's to be an attenuation tank at the front, which is to store water and then be discharged to the surface water sewer at a controlled rate. So we're actually putting in a controlling system within there to control the discharge of water. So in terms of this particular application, that's how we've come to our conclusions that the impact on drainage and flood risk is okay. The site's not in flood zone 2 or 3, so that the principle of basement is considered to be acceptable. So that's how we've come to that view on that.
Any other questions? Councillor Pearce.
Thank you. I'm always... Sorry. I'm always sort of very concerned about basements. Can you... Councillor Makin's last question, is that method that you're putting in, is that consistent all the way around the site of the development for drainage? Because coming down an incline does tend to change the method.
I don't have the details particularly in front of me, but I do know that there is the infiltration attenuation tank, being proposed here at the front to capture all surface water. The back here is to be laid to grass, which is obviously currently the existing situation. Obviously, it's grass beyond the basement, so that area would remain as natural.
The basement sticks out the back, so that's what makes me a bit more concerned about the displacement of water around the back or around the rear end of the actual building.
Well, our flood risk officer has looked at that and looked at the basement as a whole, and the advice back from him is now that he's seen the indicative drainage information, he's happy with that.
Comment? Any more questions? No? Comments, please. Councillor Dean.
Well, we've seen a number of planning applications, and considering the professional presentation, that really surprises me. Because if they were so professional, I imagine they would have got it right first time. The reality is here that what's happened is that they've gone for what's known in the trade as scope creep, where they get the first one through. Once that's fine, it's very hard for a committee to say, well, they've just had a little tickle here, how can we stop this? So they got the second one through, and then we've had the third one, and now we sit here thinking, well, hang about, well, this is hardly different. But if you do look at those 3 planning applications, well, there clearly are differences, otherwise we wouldn't be sitting here today. This time last year, or similar time, we agreed that planning application in terms of footprint at ground level and height. But as it is on a hill, and as we've been very antagonistic against basements rather than agnostic, this is here as a tickle, but actually I think it's a drama. And the bulk and massing are not just about what you see, what this is doing to the people around them, what this is doing to underground. And if any of us look around Merton today, the number of tankers from Thames Water that are littered on our roads, causing roadworks, because of the problems that are happening with sewage. Any of you could see the damage that's being caused on our roads because of the problems, the fact that we live on a hill. Then we can see what's happening here. And this basement, why wasn't it put in last year? And that's absolutely clear to me. That's because it would have been rejected. And I'm saying that we don't allow this scope creep if the applicant wishes to build this very large house on this not so very large plot, then they have consent, and I'd ask them to go and build it because they've had 10 years to think about it. And we as a council, as a committee, should say no to this basement because of the damage it's going to do, not just to the neighbours, but the locality. And we should throw this out on bulk and massing, and I propose that rejection.
Are there any other comments? Councillor Southgate.
Well, it's always a fine speech from Councillor Dean. I enjoyed it, and I've got a lot of sympathy with it but bulk and massing, no, it's all underground, isn't it? All right. No, I think this has been so hedged about by conditions, which is the way we approach these things, that we actually don't have grounds to turn it down on the scale of the basement. Although it does, just in passing, that leaves only 42 square metres out back of amenity turf. I worry about amenity turf. Is it plastic? But again, not a condition on which we can turn it down. Thank you.
Okay.
I think we're going to have to depend on the officers to, when they get the method statement, just to ensure that they're satisfied with it and make sure that building work doesn't start before they're happy with the statement. And in that way, we can prevent or do something about any future flooding or anything like that. So the statement must come in, must be approved before anything starts.
We're going to call that overdevelopment, actually.
I'd like to make a comment about it, and that is that in terms of the changes, really, it's about the basement, and I think it's gone through committee before and it's been accepted. I don't think we can argue about the building itself. The basement is the issue. Basements are going up left, right and centre. As far as I can see, I can't see there is anything that we could turn down about this application. That's my personal view. We'll take the recommendation. We'll see those who are in favour. We've got a seconder. Those in favour of to refuse on the ground of bulk and mass, please. Show. And those against. Okay. Voting on the recommendation as a whole, please. Those in favour, please. Sorry. The condition of the roof not being used as a balcony, is that the one you wanted to say? I think an answer was given to the fact that it was a zinc roof with a roof light, and that wouldn't be appropriate to be on a balcony anyway, or we'd have to go through planning. Do we need an additional condition for that?
That was what the officer suggested.
Said we could put it in, but is it necessary?
Well, it's not necessary.
Well, it would have to come back for permission, wouldn't it? Is it necessary to put in as a condition? It's up to you if you want to put it in as a condition, but it seems a bit unnecessary. Okay, can we agree the recommendation then without the balcony? Councillor McGrath. Agree, okay. Those in favour, please show. 7. Those against. Then the recommendation is carried. Thank you. We now move to agenda item 5, which is 6 to 12 London Road, Morden.
If I can just refer members to the modification sheet, you'll see that between the agenda being published and the committee meeting, the planning officers now received the feedback from Transport for London. The site's on part of the strategic road network, and Transport for London have raised no objections to the proposals. This application is brought before committee because it departs from adopted planning policies and is therefore not for officers to determine under the council's scheme of delegation. The site comprises the majority of the floor space that formerly comprised the Woolworths store in Morden. Notwithstanding that it lies at the far eastern end of the centre, it is nevertheless within a designated primary shopping frontage. The proposals would introduce a number of small office-type spaces for use within Class A2, Financial and Professional Services, Class B1A, Office, and Class D1, Community and Education type uses, in addition to the existing permitted use for retail purposes. And that's the proposed layout. So that's how we are at the moment, and that's the proposed layout within the building. Where uses such as those are proposed come forward as a planning application, adopted policy sets a number of criteria that an applicant needs to meet. It requires 12 months of marketing, not detracting from the retail function of the area, 50% of the remaining units remaining in retail use. But I would stress to members, adopted policy was drafted well before Morden Centre was designated as one of the Mayor's housing zones, and predates much of the work on the town centre regeneration being conducted by the council in conjunction with Transport for London. Looking at the criteria, while 12 months marketing does not accompany the application, with the downturn in retailing, occupation of the large retail space has proved challenging for the owner, and officers consider a large vacant space in the town does little to maintain its vitality and vibrancy. Coupled with the state of flux in Morden Town Centre, where the council in conjunction with Transport for London are examining opportunities to deliver major housing-led regeneration, the proposals provide opportunities for the flexible use of space for purposes appropriate overall to the town centre economy. The primary retail function runs from the entrance to Athena House to the west of Morden Station through to the roundabout at the eastern end of the town centre. While the application site is immediately to the east of the key regeneration area, this primary frontage forms the key part of the area that is under scrutiny for redevelopment. While the frontage still retains a variety of national and independent traders, it also contains numerous food and drink and service uses, with the latest revision of the GPDO providing flexibility to change between A1 and A2 uses. Officers consider that the character of the easternmost part of the shopping centre has changed in recent years, and while not maintaining a retail frontage, it's considered that the proposals would complement rather than detract from its vitality. The use raises no issues with regards to noise and disturbance, being located below a private function hall for which permitted hours were allowed following an appeal. And if I can direct members to paragraph 716 of the officer's report. The proposals also raise no issues with regards to traffic, transport and servicing. The highly accessible nature of the town centre by public transport lends itself to both B1 and D1 uses, where staff and customers can access the site by means other than car. In contrast, the servicing needs of a large retail store are, perhaps, no longer so well served by a location on a red route with various all-day parking restrictions, and where servicing from larger vehicles to the rear is more likely to impact on residents of Kenley Road. Thus, while resumption of the ground floor as a shop might be welcomed, the proposals would not preclude this from happening without having to reapply for planning permission. In the meantime, the proposals would provide appropriate employment uses and activity and footfall in the town centre. It's considered there are reasonable grounds not to apply adopted policy slavishly in this instance and to approve the proposals subject to conditions. The images that I'm showing you here I'm afraid, indicate that the applicant has been perhaps rather enthusiastic with their application. And inside you'll find that a lot of partitions and little spaces have been created which, if permission is granted, would readily avail themselves to the proposed use. Thank you.
We haven't got any speakers for this one, so are there any questions? Councillor Southgate.
Yes, I suppose somebody who's took a look around at the office units here and remarked how small they were, pokey was the word, and an absence of natural light. Is there anything at all in the London plan to prescribe minimum, space requirements for this kind of development?
Chair, the key factors that we may look at would be the degree of accessibility to the site. So, do the proposals maintain accessibility to the premises for persons with disabilities? Well, they would. Having gone into the site, I was struck by the fact that quite a lot of the rooms seemed quite light and airy. They were being decorated in quite, light and bright colours, very plain and simple, with windows. If I can just take you back to the photograph. It doesn't really show it here. That's unfortunate. As you walk your way through the two corridors within the premises, there are windows to some of these units, so it's not as if you're in sort of a completely enclosed space. So you've got light coming in from the corridor. But no, I'm afraid the long and short of it is there's no mandatory requirements set out in, a supplementary planning document for this type of proposal, I'm afraid.
No other questions? Yeah.
You said earlier on the Sam's building was the hall was passed on appeal. So, would the noise from there affect this build? Because it goes, the hall is above it, so presumably there will be quite a few elephants in the room.
It's not uncommon to have different types of commercial uses operating one next to another. I think I might have been more concerned had the proposals been for the use of the ground floor perhaps as a function hall and the upper floor had been converted to residential, because then we might have had a meaningful planning basis to require soundproofing requirements. But in this instance, you've got two different types of commercial uses next to each other, and there wouldn't be a planning basis to impose conditions requiring, for example, soundproofing against noise and vibration.
Be helpful if we weren't having conversations during this, please. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yeah, okay. Councillor Dehaney.
You're still waiting on comments from Transport for London, but whatever they say wouldn't make a difference to this. Oh, this is it here. Oh, comments? Comments, please.
Yes, sorry, Chair. That because the site is on part of the Transport for London strategic road network, we're required to seek their views when determining a planning application. And although it's a little late in the day, they have come back to us and said they raise no objections.
Thank you, Chair. Taking on board Mr. Lewis's comments about the housing zone and about all the possible redevelopment, well, I've been involved in that sort of discussion going back to the early 2000s, and the way this particular town centre and many others are going, yes, I think maybe the offices are rather small, but if it was living accommodation, we wouldn't wear it. But offices, maybe some, because if you took the partitions away, they'd still be sitting close to each other. Lots of people do, don't they? But I think, taking it all in all, we have to be practical, we have to be pragmatic, and maybe any development on a large scale between us and TfL is realistically at least another 3 years away, and we don't really want our town centre with large empty spaces. I think we've no alternative but to be flexible and say yes.
Okay, no other... Councillor Southgate.
But I'm going to agree with Councillor Pearce. I think it's quite interesting, isn't it, that you can get a bit stuck in the past if you're over rigid about applying your planning policies. I mean, I've got plenty of people who tell me about how it was wonderful in Morden when there was 7 different shoe shops and a co-op, but those days are not coming back. And I think, it would be reasonable to put rather more weight on our new draft local plan, which, with reference to Morden, let me quote this bit, with the traditional high street retailers hit by online trading, Morden must look to new uses that will enliven the high street, help to create a vibrant nighttime economy. And it also talks about supporting an appropriate mix of retail, office, community and leisure uses. So, we do need to evolve. Whether this will work out or not, I don't know, but it has the... it's so safeguarded that it can revert to previous uses. And I think the tuition aspect in particular is interesting when you realise that 41% of the children in secondary schools in London receive tuition coaching outside of school, a frightening figure. But yes, there is a market, I'm sure, and it's flexible and sensible, pragmatic use of the space.
I don't think we need to say any more about that one. Planning enforcement, again to note, but if you've got any issues to raise, yes, Councillor Dean.
The former laundry site, 1 Caxton Road, this has been running, I don't think it's 10 years, but it's almost close. Certainly the application was full of holes, but the committee doesn't often worry about that. Clearly everything that the objectors complained about 8 or 9 years ago have come to fruition. The applicant, through Section 106, has meant to provide access to Hayden Road's train station for wheelchairs, etc. And I don't know who's to blame, National Rail, the applicant. But it's saying here, this is dramatic, this is a block of flats, that the planning enforcement notice issued in October, that means that they may have to demolish the whole development. It's shoddy from the start, it was a poor application, and I'm just asking officers to ensure that when the date comes, that if demolition is the answer, then demolition has to take place, because this has always been an absolute disgrace, and the applicant has ridden roughshod over this council's wishes, and the council needs to stand up to them. Thank you.
On the Burnbullock site, we have the same comments there every meeting about this. Does that mean nothing has been done about it?
I can provide Councillor Makin, or the planning service can provide you with some feedback, but I'm afraid at this very moment I can't. It's unfortunate in the sense that Marcus Beale, who was here earlier presenting the Ridgeway Place application, is very familiar with the site, having been instructed by the owners to look at its development potential, and he may have been able to assist. But for the time being, I'll take that away and get one of the team to get back to you.